So the Government of Canada will contribute $200,000 to support the medical care that the team is providing here.
Foreign Minister John Baird in Ukraine. This is very, very serious. I'm always loath to talk about the Second World War when we talk about modern events, but the Germans in Poland going in there, disguising some of their soldiers as Poles, flying the flag, saying they were under attack as the premise and the preface for sending in German troops. Crimea is going to be the centre of attention over this weekend, and I would predict by Monday a very different story will be told. John Mraz joins us, Sun News contributor. You know Crimea. I've got to tell you the story. It's not directly relevant, but my great-great-grandfather was in the Crimean War in the Russian army. He was a Russian Jew, and they raided the village, I think about 13 or 14. They put a ring in his ear saying property of the Tsar, and for 20 years he was in the Russian army, including in the Crimean War. But this has frequently been the place for battles, cultural war, physical military war. This surely cannot end well.
It doesn't look like it's off the rails today. I mean, it's been a very interesting day. It started with Vladimir Putin, who had conspicuously said nothing about Yanukovych's disappearance and rearrival in Russia. He was using proxies. He used Medvedev. Putin never says anything until he's sure about what he wants to say. This morning, he calls on the heads of 3 EU states and says, let's not escalate the violence. It sounded like, you know, the beginning of a nice negotiation. In the last hour or two, reports of 2,000 troops being flown in on 13 airplanes into an airport now controlled by Russians
there are 2
in Crimea.
Aren't they, controlled by the Russians?
There are 3 airports. 3 airports.
How many airports are in the region then?
3 that I know of, anyway. 3 that I know of.
So all air travel and all military transport by air will be controlled by the Russians?
Well, currently, nobody was even sure earlier on today who the troops were at the first 2 airports that were controlling them. It now appears they were not Berkutskis or Ukrainian special forces, but actually Russian forces. The other thing that's happened in the last hour, phone networks are down across Crimea. The Crimean Broadcasting Service, I suppose their version of the CBC, is no longer free, has been taken over. That's the latest report 5 minutes before I walked in here. And attack helicopters coming across the Straits of Kerch delivering more supplies from Russia. That's on the east side of Crimea. Crimea is, to really answer your question, geopolitically incredibly important for Putin. He's got his largest warm water east side naval base there. In fact, his entire fleet were designed to accommodate the low bridges that you have to go under to get out.
But they're there legally, though. Did the Ukrainian government not negotiate with them and say the Black Sea Fleet could be there for a long period of time?
They have been there for a long time on legitimate leases, and they are still there on a legitimate lease that Yanukovych signed extended for another 20 or 30 years, if I recall correctly. They are there. The U.S. and Europe can't get their aircraft carriers into the area because the bridges are too low. Their ships are not designed to do that. I believe there is an aircraft carrier now sitting off the coast of Turkey. The UN have called for a special closed-door meeting of the Security Council tonight. This is serious stuff.
I mentioned the Crimean War at the beginning. Over Turkey, for goodness sake, Britain and France and Piedmont, a part of Italy, went to war against Russia. Russia regards this area, understandably to a degree, as being part of historic Russia. It's not a question, I know some Ukrainians will be upset with me for saying this, but it's not the Russians saying we want to expand into. They say this is part of our country, it shouldn't be Ukraine anyway. We accepted it was part of Ukraine, but if you say now it's going to be, in effect, friendly to the West, we will not allow that to happen.
Well, it's even a little more complicated than that. Remember that while recently, anyway, Crimea has been part of Ukraine, it also had its own autonomous government. Sort of a Puerto Rico, if you will. Sort of has its own government, but that government also reports to and is fed finances by, the Ukrainian government out of Kiev. So, if you had a plebiscite, a referendum in Crimea today, probably it would vote to go with Russia. Not by the 80 or 90% that it's being suggested by the Western press, because certainly the Tatars, the 10% Muslim population, probably don't want to join Russia. But young Crimeans might not be as excited about Putin as their parents.
Let me ask you, if there was a referendum in eastern Ukraine, which is not the entire east of the country, but the region eastern Ukraine, do you think they would vote to be part of Russia?
Nobody knows the answer to that. 5 years ago, absolutely. But Yanukovych was, the latest poll I saw a couple weeks ago, Yanukovych was down to 35% support in a lot of the oblasts that were perceived to be his strongholds. And the football clubs, and I know you love football, so you'll be interested, who had historically supported Yanukovych with muscle on the street and votes and, you know, a volunteer force, had turned to support the opposition. I don't know the names of the Eastern Ukraine.
Because Tottenham beat one yesterday. A great game. I mustn't digress into that. This is fascinating. But how bad will it get? This is not George Bush who is president. This is Barack Obama. Is he willing? And of course, Turkey. People should look at the map. Turkey very close by, and Turkey's playing a game of expansion here. Turkey wants to be the major power in the Islamic world. It wants to almost resurrect the empire that it had, the Ottoman. They're looking on. Iran is looking on too. They're not so far away. This involves a lot of people. Those countries that aspire to be members of the European community are going to say at this point, in the East at least, should we? I mean, if we can't be protected, and if Russia is right there, so a lot depends on what goes on in the next few days. Yes,
it certainly does. My belief is that NATO. My belief is, and I'm just speculating, that NATO, if Russia takes Crimea, will not act. My other belief is that if the Russians started to move north or south in a pincer movement to try and take eastern Ukraine, you might actually have a conflagration. You might actually have some conflict.
It's incredible to think that after so many years of the Soviet Union, when direct war was avoided, a post-Soviet, a post-communist Russia could be on the edge of armed conflict with the West.
I don't think Putin, what he did today was accidental. He reassures everybody he doesn't want violence in the morning, and then he takes Crimea completely unopposed in the afternoon and the evening. Because he knows we will let him.
Have you back next week. If you're in town, you've got to come back next week. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you, Michael.